Now, our next presentation will be Dr. Claudia Fugazza. So she is our researcher and her major fields are social learning, imitation, memory and language learning, and processing in dogs. She developed a training method called the Do As I Do, which relies on dogs' social cognitive skills. She is currently working on a project on language learning and processing in dogs, the Genius Dog Challenge. Today, she will talk about the study on self-presentation in dogs, more specifically about representation of own actions. In other words, they investigated if dogs are aware of what they do. So please welcome Dr. Claudia Fugazza on Are Dogs Aware of What They Do?
So hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here and have the possibility to present this study because I think that this is one of the most interesting and most important studies of my career. Here we are investigating whether dogs represent their own actions. So in other words, whether they are aware of what they do. The background is of course, self-representation. Self-representation, or how some people call it, is self-awareness, is traditionally studied with the mirror self-recognition test. In this paradigm, an animal like typically a chimpanzee is exposed to is actually given a colored spot on a part of his body that he cannot see unless he is in front of a mirror, for example on his forehead. So if you have a colored red dot on your forehead, you will only be able to see this if you look at your image in a mirror. Once animals are exposed to mirrors with a mark in a place of their body where they cannot see it, their behavior is observed, and if they show evidence of investigating their body and the place of their body where the spot is, this is taken by some authors as evidence that they are recognizing themselves in the mirror, and some authors even take it to that they may have some self-awareness. Now, we know that dogs can use a mirror to solve a task, but there is no evidence at the moment of self-recognition using a mirror in dogs. However, some species may not be motivated to attend to mirrors, and indeed, in the case of dogs, most features of their physical appearance, for example, the color or the length of their hair, might not be relevant for survival and reproduction. Therefore, we think that the mirror self-recognition test may not be an ecologically relevant test for dogs. Our aim here is to study self-representation with a different approach. We think that while most authors think of self-representation or self-awareness as a 0-1 type of trait, which means that it is either present or absent in a given species, we think that the representation of the self may be built by an array of cognitive traits, and each of them may have evolved in some species based on their evolutionary history. So that all of those building blocks actually may interlock, in the case of humans, interact and interlock to build the fully fledged and more complex sense of the self that humans have. So we are investigating these single building blocks in different studies with my colleagues. And in the study that I want to present, we investigated the ability to represent own actions and remember them. I need to introduce the concept of episodic memory because it's important for this study. So episodic memory is memory of events that are encoded incidentally. This means events that when you experience them, you did not know that you were supposed to remember them. You did not know that they were important. To test episodic memory, then the test should be unexpected, because if you expect to be asked about an event then in the moment when you experience the event, you can prepare a response. And therefore your encoding of the event would not be incidental anymore, and you would rely on a different type of memory. So to test episodic memory, we use unexpected test. This means that the dog is not expecting to be tested on this. We have somewhat recently found evidence of episodic-like memory in dogs. The dogs in the study dogs were remembering with episodic memory actions performed by their owners. Importantly, in humans, episodic memory is traditionally thought to be linked to self-awareness. So in this study, we investigated on mental representation and episodic memory of own actions in dogs. In other words, as I said, whether dogs are aware of what they do. We enrolled for the study 10 dogs that were trained with the do as I do method and specifically trained to repeat their own actions on command repeat. The repeat training included 2 stages. In the first stage, the dog was trained to repeat his own actions with 3 familiar actions, actions that the dog was previously trained to perform on command, and now the dog was trained by operant conditioning rules to repeat them when asked repeat. And in the second stage, the dogs were exposed to a generalization of this rule so that they were asked to apply the repeat rule to other 3 actions, so overall working with 6 actions. Once the dogs were able to repeat the 6 actions, then they went through a testing procedure. The test included several different tests, actually. The baseline was a test where we wanted to assess whether the training was successful. So we tested the dogs on the 6 trained actions. And if the dogs were successful, then we moved to the next testing phase. In the next testing phase, the dogs were tested on novel action. Here, novel means actions that the dog was previously trained to perform, but was never asked to repeat. So for the first time, the dogs were exposed to a situation where they were asked to perform a specific action, which was not included in the repeat training, and then they were asked to repeat it. We also tested the dogs in a test where we mixed, so to say, do as I do and repeat, so that in some trials, the owners asked the dog to perform an action and then gave the repeat command. In some trials, the owner would demonstrate an action and ask the dog to imitate with the do it command. And in some trials, the owners would demonstrate an action, then ask the dog to imitate with the do it command, and then ask the dogs to repeat. The key test of this study, however, was the so-called spontaneous action test. These were 2 different tests in which we exposed dogs to an everyday life situation, nothing that had to do with training, so that an eventual test, an eventual repeat command would be unexpected because the dog was not in a training situation. In the object spontaneous test, the dog was exposed to 4 novel objects that he could potentially explore. And as soon as the dog performed a well-identifiable action on one of the objects, the owner gave the repeat command. And in the bench spontaneous test, the owner was sitting on a bench or on a sofa reading a book, therefore ignoring the dog. So the dog did not think to be in a training situation. And as soon as the dog performed a well-identifiable action, the owner gave the repeat command. We, of course, included several control conditions. For example, we excluded that dogs were repeating the actions just because in a given situation, that given dog might do always the same action. So we expose the dog to the given situation, and then we place the dog again in the same situation to control for this. Here is a video of the methods.
Bench. Repeat. Brinko. Repeat.
And here you can see the results. So as you can see here, here is the proportion of successful repeats, so trials in which the dog successfully repeated in the baseline test, and when dogs were tested on novel actions, trained actions, but never repeated before. Here is always the same baseline, so you have a reference. And these are the trials of the test where we mix the do-as-I-do and the repeat. The blue dot refers to the imitation of the owner actions, so trials in which the owner demonstrated an action and then gave the repeat. The green dot is the performance of the dogs in the trials where the owner asked the dog to perform an action and gave the repeat command. And the red dot is the performance of the dogs in the trials where the owner demonstrated an action, gave the repeat, gave the do it command, and then gave the repeat command. And this is the most important part of the study. This is where we tested the dogs in everyday life situation. Again, you have the black dot, which refers to the baseline. And the blue dots are the test. On the left here is the bench test. And these are the proportion of successful trials to repeat the actions performed spontaneously in everyday life after different delays. We tested the dogs without delay, with 20 seconds delay, and with 1 minute delay, and with 1 hour delay. And in both cases, this is on the right, you have the object spontaneous test. You can see that the dogs were successful in repeating after no delay and after short delays of 20 seconds and somewhat also after 1 minute, and only some dogs repeated after 1 hour. So this shows a steep decay of the memory. The episodic memory, in fact, decays faster. This is consistent with previous data that we have about episodic memory in dogs, and it is also known to happen in humans. We also tend to forget more quickly events that we encode incidentally. So what can we learn from this study? Well, dogs can mentally represent their own actions, and they recall them using episodic-like memory. Importantly, this is a building block of the more complex ability to represent the self. I would like to thank you for your attention. I would like to thank all of my colleagues that contributed to this study and that always support my work. And I would like all the dog owners and trainers that collaborated with me for this study.